And I kind of abandoned the idea for a second in my head. And then I suddenly thought, hold on a moment. There's nobody doing this for business. And hence we set about building a digital payments platform, which is CleverCards today, which creates the ability for anyone, anywhere, anytime to be paid instantly. But you can give up to €1,000 tax-free to the directors, the managers, the employees of a company. We've got, the top companies in Ireland that have distributed CleverCards to their employees, all the way down to somebody buying 2 cards. So last year, we had about 2,500 businesses that we signed up in the space of 8 weeks, and we'd no sales team. So to say we've hit product market fit on that is an understatement.
Kealan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I want to get us started by maybe going back a little bit in time and just talking about your journey, a chartered accountant at the age of 21 and now a successful entrepreneur, business owner and investor. Tell us a little bit about that.
That journey. That's a long journey.
And journey, I'd say.
Well, look, I qualified, as you said, when I was 21. It came through an unusual route at the time in that become a chartered accountant, you could have gone the university route, got a degree, and then kind of did the last couple of exams of the professional exams. I'd missed out on my university degree by 1 point in the old days, the old numbers, I should say, the old point system. And so I did the first year was actually full-time study, and then I did chartered accountancy by night. The advantage of that was that I had worked with an up-and-coming firm called BDO at the time, or it was called Simpson Xavier back then, 30-odd people in the company. Phenomenal practice, I have to say. Got in at the right time, early stage, and that actually, I can see the benefits of getting into a business and the attractiveness of getting into a business at an early stage. It was an entrepreneurial environment, and to be honest with you, they were extremely smart, Dave and Antoine, who ran it, because when they marketed themselves and played to the entrepreneurial audience, and that's who their customer base needed to be, that was 90% of the market. So rather than saying we're going to go after the big enterprises, they went after the entrepreneurial. But there was an entrepreneurial culture, and we worked extremely hard, got phenomenal experience. I think it was about 500 or 600 people there when I left, so qualified at 21, and won't go through every year between there and 53. But from there I left, and kind of really had an urge to go out on my own. So went out on my own as a naive 21-year-old, brass plate in Coolmine Industrial Estate, as if people were going to be coming knocking on my door. That was the greatest waste of £100 I ever put into a sign. And but anyway, having for about a year I was kind of doing basic stuff for small clients, and I had a guy who was selling his business. He was in the middle of a sales process for a pharmaceutical packaging business with one customer. And he pulled me in, and I got the job to advise him on the due diligence. He already had a sale advisor on board, but my role was to come in and help him on the due diligence and get the sale through. He already had an offer on the table that he accepted, and that was a really interesting piece. It was a huge gig for me, obviously. Frankly, the only reason I got the gig was I was cheap. And he wasn't. He was a bit of a tight bastard, so he wasn't going to pay some of the big guys. Yeah. So that's how I got it. But unfortunately, the sale advisor that he had used was also very cheap, but wasn't so efficient. So my role ended up turning into a sale advisory role. He fired the other guy, I got quite passionate about the business. And I kind of said to him one evening, he wouldn't tell me the purchase price. And I was involved in the diligence, and eventually when I got that out of him, I felt the business was worth more. And so explained how and why and everything else, etc. And he ran off to the purchaser and said, I've been told this business is worth twice the price. And in the space of 2 weeks, they revised the number and the price was doubled. Now, that gave me a lot of gung-ho. It gave him a lot of gung-ho. And I was going like, hold your horses now. Let's put a business plan together. This is how it's done. Let's look at the market. Let's look at everything that's associated with it. And let's not just look at the old numbers. Let's look forward as to where this could go. And we did that, and we doubled it again. Okay, now we were kind of told, it's your last shot, but this guy made 4 times the money. He paid me £100,000 when I was 22, 23 years of age.
A lot of money back then.
Huge amount of money, but first house for cash, red BMW, and kind of thought I'd won the lotto, and I was still too immature to trade off that. Had I gone on, in a professional service environment, and maybe I could have traded off that, but I didn't really have that vision, but honest, at the time. I was kind of thinking it was a one-off, it'll never happen again. And the CEO of the acquirer asked me if I'd be interested in going in as finance director of that company. Now, at this stage, I'd written the business plan, I'd studied the market, I understood where I could have gone. And what was really interesting in that business was that back in that time, which is 30 years ago, credit again to the Irish government and IDA, they had a strategy of bringing pharmaceutical and medical device businesses into Ireland. That was their strategy, in the same way as they brought in all the other industries since, diversified from farming, let's say. And so once we had the first one, by the time what happened then is I subsequently, nearly 2 years later, I think it was, I ended up buying the company out in a management buyout. There was no real private equity in Ireland. Again, my naivety, one of the investors today in CleverCards was a corporate banker with AIB. And I went to him and said, I wonder, could I raise the money to buy this company? And he said, I'll give you 50% of it, as in AIB. So I got 50% of it in senior debt and mezzanine debt. Again, been inexperienced at that stage. The conditionality is subject to raising the equity. But, I felt I'd one pocket full of half the proceeds. I just had to fill the other pocket, which is the harder part to fill. But went to London. There was no real private equity in Ireland. Raised institutional capital from Dresden McDermott Benson. Those two partners 30 years ago are investors today in CleverCards as well. So raised the money and built that business out over the following 5 years. And it's hard to take credit at one level, and maybe I've been too tough, but we had one company which at the time was Allergan Pharmaceuticals. Then GlaxoSmithKline Beijing came into Ireland. Then, all the others came into Ireland. And bit by bit, we picked them all up. By the time I sold the company, we had 19 of the top 20 pharmas in the world. Yes, we executed on it, and it's all about operational execution, but the customers were there. And that's a huge, and it's not a lick-ass comment to the IDA or otherwise, but they are an incredible organisation in terms of what they brought in. And I've lived through some of their successes as the years have gone on. The technology world now obviously being one, but that's kind of the early stage. That obviously gave me a huge foundation. Exiting a business at such a young age, and you've got capital. Lots of things happen, at that stage. And shortly after it, I joined the main board of directors of Midwestvaco, which was the acquirer, which was the same size as Smurfit Group. Look, it's no secret that Smurfit is an investor in CleverCards today. They were actually the underbidder on that company 30 years ago. And but Midwestvaco was the competitor, same type of size, 35,000 employees, 8 billion in revenue. And I joined the board of that company as head of M&A. And that was a massive leap in my career, and I hadn't thought about career, to be quite honest with you, and learned so much. We the usual top 20 presidents club and things like that I was a member of, and got to be with Michael Porter for training for 3 days and stuff that you just, an MBA on the job, if you will. So did that for about 5 years. Probably the most notable acquisition was of a company that invented the DVD case. It was a phenomenal story. And, lots of things even today that I pinch myself on. That was a startup. How in the name of God we convinced, a 35,000 person company to buy a startup that had one customer and less than $1 million in revenue. But that customer was Disney. And once we had Disney in the UK, we ended up getting them all across Europe. Then we got Sony, then, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the whole premise of that business at the time was that video content, which up to that point was on a VHS format, probably a bit young to remember that format, but it was pre-DVD.
Yeah.
And it was kind of obvious, you could see the vision that, this was going to go on to a DVD. And the packaging around that could have been like a CD, but they wanted it to be rectangle rather than square, and it was going to be a new product in the market that was better suited for it, etc. But what happened, like all startups, is that where you start isn't where you finish. And in that case, as the movies industry took off, I remember the day that the CEO of Fox announced that there was, it used to be about the box office and, how many DVDs you could sell, but the gaming industry had outstripped it. So now there was more DVDs being sold with a PlayStation game on it or another game on it than there was with a movie. So the gaming industry became as big as the movie industry. Then the software industry was obviously all on DVD. So that was a phenomenal growth story on a global business. The reason I love talking about that particular one was, when I see, we had 70% global market share, and I mean in China, in the US, in Europe. And, when I look back now, where's that DVD? It's in a company called Netflix. And, when you look at circular pieces of plastic, like a DVD, that have gone digital, there's companies like Netflix built a digital platform for movies. Steve Jobs had the vision to say, that circular piece of plastic, I'm going to change the way. Who said there had to be 12 songs on a DVD? I'm going to change it completely and screw the whole thing up, and you can buy one tune for 99p and download it. Okay? And in the fintech world, or in the payments world, there's rectangular pieces of plastic that we hopefully someday used to call debit cards or credit cards, that we stuck in a leather wallet. Okay? Until CleverCards built a digital platform for payments in the exact same way as Netflix has done it, or iTunes or Spotify or otherwise. And that was an inspiration behind me, I have to say, a lagging inspiration in where I ended up now. But there was an interim step obviously before that,
Yeah, it must have been such a significant impact, even if you didn't know it at the time. The learnings from that, and as you said, then you're looking at the payments world to then go ahead and start CleverCards.
Yeah, so I mean, CleverCards had an earlier version, which was greeting cards. I tried to buy a company in the UK called Moonpig. Moonpig was selling birthday cards online. And it was in the early days of Vistaprint, which was a hugely successful online business selling printing online. And I'd known a lot about printing. And to be able to send printing online in the old days, people would say, that's not possible. In the same way as people say, buying a car, renting a car online, you used to say, that's not possible. So, if you can kind of look beyond today to 5 years, which is a difficult thing to do, but if you can look beyond 5 years and kind of make that slight, blind leap of faith, it's calculated risk, but when you look beyond and you'd say, you know what, I can see how in 5 years' time, people will be ordering birthday cards online. This was a small business and he wouldn't sell. And I said, you know what, the opportunity here is to a global business in terms of greeting cards and birthday cards. And we started off on that journey and built all the platform, very much a consumer-related business, which is a tough old business to get into in technology, consumer, hence CleverCards is all about business to business. But we started off in consumer, scaled it up. We were very dependent on Facebook, which was a challenge. Ironically, Gareth Lamb, who was the former head of Facebook in Ireland, is currently an investor in CleverCards, but well before his time. And we were about 5 years into that when Facebook changed all the rules in terms of API access and everything else, etc., which was the death knell of it. Fortuitously, at the time, back to IDA again, and Enterprise Ireland, I was on a trade mission with Judy Cinnamon, the CEO of Enterprise Ireland, and the guys in IDA. There's about 8 of us, and we were over in China. And we met with the head of corporate development of Tencent that was looking at licensing our platform. Now, this was just when Facebook was pulling out. So it was really pivotal times in that, well, the platform you want to license, we may not be able to license. We'd have to reconfigure it for the Chinese market. Would we, wouldn't we, etc. And what happened when I was over there was that, when we go into a restaurant and pay, I didn't see anybody using a Visa or a Mastercard or a debit or credit. Everybody used their mobile phone. And by that stage, everybody was using, iPads for Netflix and, iPhones for music. So it was crystal clear. And, China is, I'd say, 10 years ahead of us when it comes to payment technology and fintech. The United States, I think, is 10 years behind Europe. And they're still cutting checks. So you had this lovely position where in the consumer world, there was the neobanks had created the awareness for the concept of a card in the phone and digital payments in the consumer. And that was actually my first port of call. I was thinking, this is a great opportunity. And I said, hold on a second, it's a crowded market. There's already new players coming into this space. And I kind of abandoned the idea for a second in my head. And then I suddenly thought, hold on a moment. There's nobody doing this for business. Completely blue ocean, wide open, okay? And hence we set about building and building a digital payments platform, which is CleverCards today, which creates the ability for anyone, anywhere, anytime to be paid instantly. You know, I went into that challenge probably underestimating, no, I won't say probably, actually underestimating how difficult that was. It is very, very difficult. You know, I really have to question if I was to do it again. You'd say, wow, that took a long time. Now, we did it very judiciously in terms of the capital, which meant it took longer. And in some respects, when you're dealing with huge companies, it's going to take longer anyway. But you know, it was certainly a challenge. But by God, when we're at the other end of it and you've got the infrastructure in place, you're in pole position.
Yeah. And there's so much, as you say, unforeseeables, you know, when it comes to building the business, and challenges and uncontrollables and wars and recessions and pandemics. How have they affected the business?
Well, look, obviously you mentioned two of them there, which are third party external factors like COVID and like a war, okay? And, you know, they actually didn't in any way negatively impact CleverCards. In fact, they probably positively impacted CleverCards. From a COVID perspective, you know, obviously everyone knows that, you know, the market shifted very quickly to contactless and people tapping with their phones and things like that, and then learning, hey, you know, there's no limit when you tap a phone. You know, it's not this 50 quid bullshit that goes on when you tap a plastic card. And then you realise the reason that 50 quid is there is if you lose your card in a pub and somebody picks it up, they can tap it 5 times, up to 50 quid, and your account is drained. You kind of go, wow, that's a lot less secure than I thought. You know, if someone tries to break into my phone, you know, unless there's another lookalike face like this and, you know, can get into it, it becomes very, very difficult, okay? So COVID was a boon for us, really went well. And then from the war perspective, I think it has a different point. From an operational perspective, just before I talk about the war and the environment there, from an operational perspective, we were always remote. So this concept of, you know, hybrid, we were always there because we'd quite a spread team in predominantly Europe, but also some in Vietnam. And so we're always operating remotely. And, you know, you need to, I can see why companies struggle with it, but, you know, like daily stand-ups, you know, on Slack all the time, things like this, etc. We had all the tools in place and the rhythm, you know, so it wasn't just the tools, but it was the rhythm, it was how we do it, you know. So we were well able to work remotely, okay, in that regard, as in fully remote, even though we would have been hybrid at that stage. But we certainly, some of our colleagues were fully remote. And it means, you know, you're getting together quarterly and things like that, which are more important when you're more remote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And planning becomes important. From a war point of view, I think what that has done, it has changed the environment on the funding landscape. And when you're a fintech business that needs to raise capital, that's where it impacts. Obviously, there's inflation. You know, interest rates have gone up, which in turn then changes the dynamic on the capital markets, both the public markets, the M&A markets, etc. But ironically, in a positive sense, that has bode very well for us, because up to, you know, mid 2022, and I've lived through .com, okay? I invested in .com pre and post. You know, I made a lot of money, I lost money, and you really do need to have the scars when, you know, you just become sensible again to say, like, some of that stuff was bananas that went on in .com, okay? I don't think this time round the business models were as bananas, okay? There was some fundamentally good business models, lots of them, in fact, okay? So it wasn't some of the hot air that was in .com, but the valuations that were driven were bananas, okay? You don't get a company that's got 3,000 customers that's worth 4 billion any day of the week, okay? I accept it's a future valuation, but, you know, not 20 years hence, 10 years hence, and investors need to get a return on their money. And I think when you're raising 300 and 400 million at a 3 and 4 billion valuation, you know, by God, as a founder, are you setting an unbelievable bar for yourself? But more importantly, and I don't mean that in a fickle way, but much more importantly, you've set an unbelievable bar for your investors. You know, they need to get out at 6 billion if you invest at 3 billion, double their money, right? And by the way, the market for 6 billion exits, I could count them on two hands, okay? You know, obviously IPO is a route, And there have been successful companies that have done it, and in fintech space, lots of them have gone out at 15 billion and valuations like that. But when you come to the M&A market, when you're in the multiple 100 millions, there's vastly more buyers in the marketplace. So if you want to set yourself up for success as a founder and for your investors, you want to be the golden child. You want to be the one that everybody wants. You want to have built it on strong fundamentals. You want to make sure that every customer is profitable. You want to make sure that you've got a sound infrastructure in place, because that infrastructure and that business is going to be owned by somebody else. You need to make sure that regulatory and compliance is buttoned up. The day that I will be the big smile on my face is when the big bank or the big network or the big fintech or the big acquirer CleverCards, the day the head of regulatory and compliance walks out of the room having done the due diligence, is when I'll smile. But up to that point, I won't, because they are risk-averse businesses. So you absolutely have to play it, absolutely, with the intention that this is going to be owned by a bigger organisation, and how will that fit in, okay? So we've done it with a judicious amount of capital. And the landscape then, the liquidity, I could line up probably 400 companies that could afford to pay multiple hundreds of millions for CleverCards. There's a lot of founders that have gone around with the unicorn and the billion and all the rest, etc., and more power to them, okay? The probability is lower by a long shot. The probability sub 1 billion becomes infinitely bigger, okay? So you need to get your right mix in terms of where you position yourself, and that's where CleverCards has positioned. I would love someone to come in and pay more than 1 billion. Let me make that really, really clear. But in terms of probability, making it easy for the buyer, making it, extremely profitable for our investors, I think that's ultimately where it's at. And I think that what's happened now is that I think the M&A market, I think by the end of this year, I certainly, in terms of a lot of approaches that we've had from corporate development people, I can see that they're already beginning to say, right, now we can begin to look at companies, because valuations have come off a bit. But, a valuation coming from 4 billion to 2 billion is still a chunky thing for someone to try and justify internally. Whereas with something like CleverCards, I think it becomes, we can massively transform digitally and acquire CleverCards. It's very difficult for very large companies to do what we've done. A, with the amount of capital we've done it, and B, with the speed. So it is much easier for somebody to come in and say, right, we've got a digital transformation program, and you solve our problem immediately. You've got the infrastructure in place. You've got Mastercard behind you. You've got global processing capability. You can issue cards all over Europe. You're certified by Apple and Google in every country in Europe. You've got the whole infrastructure in place, and that's really where we're gearing up.
As you say, the valuations and the multipliers over the last couple of years have been ludicrous and crazy. What would your advice be to, let's say, a first-time founder, even a founder of a fintech or payments company who's trying to raise funds in this current market?
It's difficult. Okay, it is very difficult. I think if I had a friend that came to me and someone who wanted honest advice and said, look, I'm thinking of starting something up, there's definitely early stage funds out there. So I think getting the sub 1 million of funding to kind of get yourself up and running and product market fit, et cetera, I think is possible. Okay. I think the next level becomes very challenging because you have a hell of a lot to do with that million to make sure you get it right. So in the current environment, I would say, getting the seed piece of it is doable. Okay. I think moving beyond the one, upwards a little bit starts to get more challenging. So it depends on what stage you're at of that journey. And look, it's a generic comment that I'm sure you've had people talk to before, but I can tell you, building a startup from scratch is 24/7 consuming, and you need to go into that with your eyes wide open. So that's certainly advice that I'd give to somebody. It's not something that's in any way easy.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess given the governance crackdown, let's say from the financial regulator, a company like CleverCards, obviously having a partnership with Mastercard, a behemoth like that, is that tremendously helpful?
It's hugely, and the amount of testing, certification, process to integrate with Mastercard, they simply will not integrate with somebody that isn't going to play by their rules. It is a zero risk tolerance. I don't mean that negatively to Mastercard, they're right, okay? So they drove so much into our business that set us up for Mastercard level of standard. We are certified to process payments in sub 1 second anywhere in the world. Infosec testing, everything is forced in. So it's kind of a diligence, if you will, by having Mastercard do that on you before you even get to market. And I was conscious of that going into it. I said, look, the good news of this is that while it's going to take a long time, coming out the end of it, ultimately when we go to sell this business, we'll have been through that and we'll have set ourselves up for success.
Yeah. What would you say then would be the most challenging or difficult part of the process? Was it finding product market fit versus, or let's say, scaling the company? What part do you find the most difficult?
Look, I won't say all parts are difficult, but getting the right cadence as you work through. So I think you have to build the infrastructure first of all. Building payments infrastructure is extremely challenging. Okay, it's money. It's extremely challenging. Okay, so building that payments infrastructure was the first thing that we had to do. Secondly, we are a digital only company. Okay, so anybody that's got plastic cards is in a hugely comfortable position in that they've got time in their hands. You send a card out in the post, it takes time. You get them manufactured, and everything goes on. So you have lots of time to do stuff in the middle. When it's digital, it all has to be programmatic. It all has to be algorithm and rules driven. So, fraud, everything that goes with it has to be built in from the outset. And you have to get through Mastercard and the others to make sure that they're satisfied with all of that, okay? So building that infrastructure was difficult, no question about it. I mean, Stripe have done it with a hell of a lot more people than we have. And I needed to leverage Mastercard because I didn't have £1 billion to invest like Stripe did. So I had to leverage everything on Mastercard, and it took me longer, okay? So building the infrastructure was challenging. Then when we went out with product market fit, I think certainly somebody who's been through it before will know the mistakes, okay? And, we are ruthless when it comes to understanding the needs of customers. Ruthless, okay? It is critical that you understand very, very carefully who the customer is, who in the customer you're trying to solve the problem for, what their need is, what the incumbent solution is. How would you rate that solution internally out of 10? How would you rate the CleverCards solution versus the incumbent solution? And you want to be getting yourself into a zone where the customer is rating the incumbent solution a 2 out of 10. And they look at CleverCards and they go, it's a 10 out of 10. And I'm not saying that, and that's truthful, okay? We've got to that point where then it becomes a no-brainer. So when we go into customers, it's a walk in the park. They just didn't hear of it. So we have an awareness problem as distinct from a consideration and an execution problem. Because the product, when you go in, they go, it is a no-brainer. How would you distribute 5,000 cards across a company based in Ireland? Think it through. Never mind COVID. People work from home and everything that's etc. with money on it, okay? It's a no-brainer that you'd have it, that they can download it instantly, okay? And that's what we did, is we set out into the employee benefit market, because in the Irish market, as you're aware, you may not be aware, as in fact, because it frustrates me when I realise the businesses are not aware, is that you can give up to €1,000 tax-free to the directors, the managers, the employees of a company. It is money for old rope. Every single company in Ireland should be doing it. The government set out to budget for every single company in Ireland to do it, but they're not. And yes, you can go and get a voucher for a supermarket, or you can do whatever you want, and fine, maybe some people will want to do that, but when you've got a digital Mastercard that works everywhere in the world, except for cash, it has to be a non-cash benefit, and we've got the ability to configure Mastercards because we're a payment processor. So we got ourselves into a zone where we made it so easy for general managers if you're a small or micro business, sub 10 people, 10 to 50 people, medium-sized business up to 250, or enterprises. So we've got, the top companies in Ireland, all the top accountancy firms, all the top law firms. I mean, banks, we've got it from the top down that have distributed CleverCards to their employees, all the way down to somebody buying 2 cards. Okay, so we've got the full market, and it just becomes a no-brainer to use CleverCards to email these out. And then what's coming in behind it is that we're launching a business card, so that those very employees that used to use their personal Visa or Mastercards for business expenses spend endless amount of time photographing receipts and uploading them and, doing up expense claim forms. And then the managers do, hours doing the same thing, and then can't export it into accounting systems and all that nonsense that went on. Whoever came up with the idea that an employee would pay for business expenses on their personal cards? But I'm not going to give an employee a credit card with a 30 grand corporate credit limit on it. But with CleverCards, they don't have to. So with CleverCards, you can say, okay, so that employee, you're telling me I can set a credit limit of €250. Going, yeah, €500, €1,000. You set the limit. So okay, and you set the expiry date, so you can expire it next Friday. Or you can configure it so it'll only work on Instagram ads, or it'll only work on AWS, or it'll only work on petrol stations. And you've got instant real-time notifications, so when someone goes and uses the card, on your screen you can see where, when, time of day, Google Map link, you can see exactly where it's spent. It's already categorized, so it's already coded to the nominal ledger and the purchase ledger codes. So that's the problem that we've solved. It's coming out shortly, but the starting point was awareness by getting the product widely distributed into businesses, and that's where we're at.
Yeah, such a simple solution, as you say. I know there are vouchers that they work in certain stores, but you have CleverCards there where you can use it anywhere.
And we saw it last Christmas time, and people were paying motor tax. People were booking holidays. People were using it in China. People were using it in Japan. You can use the card anywhere.
Yeah. When it comes to then scaling and hiring people, what qualities would you look for when investing in people and deciding to bring them on the journey with you?
Yeah, so diversity first of all, right? So we've got an extremely diverse team. From an experience perspective, I'll use that word rather than age, right? From an experience perspective, look, I'm a chartered accountant. I'm 53. I've been around the block, okay? I'm not a 25-year-old that's a first timer. Yet I've got the energy and everything else to drive it forward. We hired the chief executive from Visa in Italy, he's had a long career in financial services. We hired the head of regulation from SumUp. We hired our SVP of marketing, ran Facebook financial services in India, and then came to Ireland and ran Facebook payments for EMEA. Our CTO was the first engineer and built all the hardware around SumUp, which was in the payment space. So we've got a variety of ages, a variety of experience. We've another young guy that's ex-McKinsey, ex-Bank of Ireland, extremely smart, and so we are very purposefully spread across the age profile. We are well enough spread on diversity of gender, but still we would be overbalanced on male versus female. So it's a conscious thing every time we're doing an interview, to make sure that we get that balance. So I think diversity and somebody who's young doesn't bring baggage. Somebody who's older will have memory muscle of the way we used to do it. And that can be a good conflict to get into the room to get both sides to it. Somebody who's on, product innovation and wants to do things, but you put them in the room of compliance and you've got two different people pushing to get the correct outcome. I value experience, okay, but in certain roles. And I also value intellect. So, we've hired some extremely bright people that don't have experience, but you put a bright person on a problem and they'll solve it. And I've seen that firsthand time and time again. I think curiosity is a very important one, and I realize it, and I didn't realize it until somebody pointed it out in an interview. A candidate asked, what were you looking for? And one of my colleagues said curiosity. And he said, Kealan is very curious and he's a learner. I was going, am I? And he said, I'm very curious and I'm a learner. And I just realised I knew nothing about payments 5 years ago. You know, so when you're there then, all of a sudden, deep into it and have studied it and understood it, et cetera, you have a curious mind to get there, you know, that's very important, you know, because in that instance, you're not coming in with the baggage and saying, well, why can't we do it this way? So, you know, I think there's some of the attributes. I think overall, we're also looking for winners. You know, when I see that somebody has played for their county in camogie or hurling, when I see that somebody was, you know, a winner in this or a winner in the other, like I see it in myself. I've got a competitive streak. I want to win. And, you know, and we want a team of winners. You know, we don't want to put 11 people on a soccer team and 2 of them don't really care whether we draw or lose. Like, no, we want to win here. So, but you need to get the right amount of you know, you want to make sure they're a team player rather than an individual competitor that wants to win for themselves rather than for the team. That's really, really important, because you can end up with a problem there.
Yeah, no, definitely. You need the, as you say, the bar raisers, you know, the people who are probably more focused on continuous development and improvement and trying to improve and solve the problems, as you say. And curiosity, it's a massive thing, isn't it? As you say, you didn't know about payments, but you're probably up every night Googling, going to meetings, asking questions, and you want to hire people who do the same. Given that that's the way your mind works, do you ever switch off, or can you switch off?
I could answer that question. My wife could answer that question, and my kids could answer that question, and you might get different extremities on it, right? The reality of it is, you are 24/7 thinking about it. It is very difficult not to think about it, okay? If I go out and cycle, I'm thinking about it. You know, if I'm going for a walk, I'm thinking about it. You know, all weekend you're thinking about it. The evening you're thinking about it. The morning, the minute you wake up, you think about it. And so it is difficult to switch off. I think you need to make a very proactive attempt to look after yourself physically as well as mentally. And I think physical drives mental. And, you know, a couple of things that I did, you know, about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I got a personal trainer in. And, you know, he comes in most mornings into the house, and, you know, that makes sure that you kind of look after, number one, in terms of, you know, physically, that you feel good. I think if you physically feel okay, it definitely helps mentally. You can tell that much easier to manage pressurized situations and stress and anxiety and things like that, far easier. So I think that's really important as a general statement for everybody. Number one, probably going a bit more extreme now, and I've put the Lycra on, and I'm doing a charity cycle shortly. From Paris to Nice, so don't know whether I'm happy or sad about that. I can tell you that's a different level of physicality altogether. So I think there's the, you know, it's important to counterbalance it with that, but you're still not mentally switching off. And, you know, for me, probably the only time that I mentally switch off is when I can go away on holiday with my family, and it still takes a few days to switch off. I probably have bandwidth of about 2 weeks, when after that, then I'm back on again thinking about it. It, as I said, it's difficult, but yeah, you know, my family will say the only time you'll get them to switch off is get them over to a beach or get them to the sunshine. The sunshine does help. Different people, different folks, different strokes. You know, I think if you go skiing, it still doesn't quite do it for me, but if I can get into a bit of sunshine, it helps. And yeah, then you begin to let the mind disappear for a little bit, and that's good, because you do need to get a bit of cleansing and that return, no question about it. You just can't keep at it, you know. So it's important. So I kind of think, you know, and it doesn't take me long. Like a long weekend is enough to recharge you for another whack of it. You know what I mean? And you know, Christmas time is a good time because it's quiet, you know. So I think the July and August months aren't too bad. You know, a lot of investors and things like that aren't around, and Christmas time, and so you get a little bit of where you can, you know. But if you try and switch off in the middle of April, that can be harder because your phone's pinging, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you say, even with the physical fitness side of things, probably that hour with your PT, you're probably switched off, or he'd like to think you are, and you're not thinking about business, and you're just thinking about the task at hand.
I was asked that question before, and you know, I'm actually not switched off.
Oh, really?
You know, like,
is that when you're thinking the most?
I won't say thinking the most, but it's funny. Like you know, you're thinking of a problem, you're trying to work it out, and the reason I say that, it was about a few weeks ago. You know, he was looking at me, and I didn't hear what he'd said because I I had just figured something out. Felt like I wanted to grab my phone and type it down and go, right, don't forget that. So
Yeah. Sometimes it is like that when you're on a walk or maybe you're training or in the shower. That's when you're, you're probably at your most creative. Yeah. What would be the best piece of advice you've gotten in business and how have you taken it on board?
Best piece of advice I've gotten in business. Wow. I've got lots of pieces of advice over the years. I mean, I'm very, very fortunate to have a phenomenally successful investor base. Remarkable people that have done remarkable things, you know, people that have built airlines, built the biggest packaging companies in the world, built the, you know, biggest distribution businesses in the world. And you look at them and you go, out of Ireland, you know, you go, this is just incredible what some of these people have achieved. So I am inspired by those people. I'm inspired as to how achievable it is. You know, nobody goes into something necessarily knowing that at the other end, you're going to be the market leader in the world. Nobody does. You might have a vision, you're trying to get there, but, you know, when you get there, you know, it was by resilience and all those other things that you have. And resilience is a big, big trait, because if you give up, you give up. Now, you don't want to be stupid about it. You need to give up when you need to know to give up. So that's an important one as well. I've learned that lesson. When you look at something and you learn, you say, look, this is going nowhere, drop it quick, move on, you know. So I think people talk about pivoting in fintech. I hate, or in technology, I hate that term, because, you know, the opposite to pivoting is to say, do what you're doing and you know it's wrong. Well, I wouldn't back any entrepreneur that does that. You know, you need to be focused on where the prize is. And if that means making a change, make the change and make it fast, you know?
Yeah. It reminds me of the saying, do it, delegate it, or dump it. As you say there, just knowing when to drop it and when to move on. In terms of then the future for CleverCards, what's in store? What have you got planned?
So we are, you know, we're going to be good out in the second half of this year, which is starting now, where we are scaling up very aggressively our sales team. So we're going to be hiring 12 to 15 people now. On the sales team, we're hiring on our marketing team, we're hiring on our product team, we're hiring an engineering team, we're hiring in compliance. So there's a huge amount of investment going in across all the functions. We've had a phenomenal run with it. You know, we've you know, in the space of 8 weeks last year, you know, we had about 2,500 businesses that we signed up in the space of 8 weeks, and we'd no sales team. So you can imagine it was bananas. The technology worked seamlessly. Not one single card went down. Live chat worked seamlessly. Customer support worked seamlessly. Everything worked seamlessly, except for the fact that the inbound was way bigger than we thought it would be. So to say we've hit product market fit on that is an understatement. So we're now capitalizing on that, and investing in sales and marketing to basically go and own the market now. Okay. So that's the first thing we do. And really what we want to do is, you know, the vision is that every single employee in Ireland, or a mission at least, that every single employee in Ireland will have a CleverCard on their phone. And I think that's achievable. And I don't mean that with tongue-in-cheek or otherwise. I think that is achievable, that you'll have a situation that every employee will have a CleverCard on their phone. The route that we do that is through the employee benefits, that we say, look, you know, you can give it. Why wouldn't you give somebody something that's tax-free to them? Tax deduction for you, it's just a no-brainer, whether it's 20 quid or 1,000 quid, doesn't matter. And then coming in off the back of that is our business card offering, where we have we've made it so easy for finance teams. We've made it so easy for the employees, and you know, I think every employee should have a business card in the same way as, you know, when they're onboarded. You know, it's like having a digital payslip. You just get one. There might be no money on it, okay, and that's up to your employer in terms of absolute control from the finance function, where they can control what you get, what it's for, everything else, complete visibility and everything else, etc. But it creates the ability for anyone, anywhere, anytime to pay something instantly. It's the future of it's what Netflix did to movies, the configurability, you know, your wish lists, your genres, your categories. It's the same type of concept that we've done with payments. So we're scaling up. We'll be raising capital before the middle of next year. Probably raising the region of 20 million. And, you know, as I said, we landed over 2,000 businesses in the space of 8 weeks, and we've landed another 3,000 in the last 12 weeks. And we've had faster growth than any other payments company out there. So there are some international peers, one has about, 25,000 businesses. They raised money at a 4.5 billion value, a 6 billion valuation, invested 400 million and got 25,000 businesses after 5 years. So, we got that in less than 6 months. We've 250,000 cardholders. We've another business we looked at that has about 4,000 businesses. They invested 300 million over 5 years. So we've proven it. We have scaled faster than any other payments B2B business out there because we've got a unique strategy. We've got barriers to entry. We've got points of differentiation. We own our own infrastructure. And I think putting that investment in and then every single customer is profitable. So I think we've got the magic from a company perspective, from an investor perspective. I think there's a huge opportunity. And most of all, when you solve a major pain point for customers and you make it easier for the customers, and the customer being whether it's a HR person, whether it's a finance person, or whether it's the employees, when you solve for all the stakeholders, that's where you've got the magic. Everything else flows from there.
Yeah, no, definitely. As you say, look, scaling and growing the business is great, but that customer feedback must be brilliant as well.
Yeah.
Just because it's such a simple solution and solving so many problems.
Yeah.
When usually at the end of every podcast, I do a couple of quick fire questions. So I'll just jump straight in and hit you with the first one. Something you wish you did earlier in your career?
Something I wish I did earlier in my career. I was only talking to my daughter about this recently. It was just on her leaving cert. When I didn't, I wanted to do commerce in UCD and missed it by a point in the old system. And but then when I did accountancy, I was qualified at 21. Did what I did, bought a house, did all that stuff, etc. I was way out of my years, I suppose, compared to my peers at the time. I had a faster track into business, let's say. And at that stage, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was going, you all got it wrong, going to university, wrong way to go, wouldn't recommend it to anyone, this is obviously the way to go, etc., etc. When I'd made a lot of money and I was in my 30s, the world was my oyster and I was absolutely convinced it's the way to go. When I was 35, maybe, onwards at that stage, then I was going, and you're listening to people talking about, that year that we went to Australia for the summer where we're in college, or that year that we went to Canada, etc., etc. That's the one thing then you go, what would an extra 3 years have made a difference? And so maybe in hindsight, having had a shorter work life or a later start to it, if you will, and having extended the student part of my life, might have been a bit of fun. I wouldn't say it's a longing in any way, and I've been very fortunate to be able to do what I've been doing. But so yeah, maybe that's one thing that I might have. If I put it this way, if I was recommending it to somebody now, I'd say no. Just now's the time when you can bum around. You have loads of time to do it.
Have a few stories off the back of it. Would you say you have a biggest failure or business failure or anything that keeps you up at night?
Well, have I had business failures? Loads of them. And you make mistakes all the time. The important thing to do, obviously, I know it's cliched, is not to make them again, but I can tell you when you make mistakes, I think it'd be pretty foolish to make the same mistake twice now. Maybe some people do, but yeah, and at various levels it can get quite technical. Diversity was something that I'd worked on in terms of investments and things like that, and kind of then found myself in a situation where some of it wasn't as diverse as I wanted it to be. And that was extremely painful. It's a lot easier to lose money than it is to make money. So I think having made mistakes, and again, it's cliched, but it was actually one of our investors rang me one day and asked me would I meet this girl that worked with him. He said, she's absolutely brilliant and she wants to go out on her own. And he said, I'm thinking of giving her a few quid. And he said, my only concern, Kealan, she hasn't made any mistakes yet and she hasn't had any losses. And I don't know how she'll deal with it. And he was right. And, you really do need to have people, like we've hired people that have had failed startups. And, because they come in wise to what can go wrong. So I actually think having mistakes is more of an asset. Like, it sounds very negative, but, if you've never made a mistake, I'm taking a gamble as to, are you going to make a mistake because you're just blind to it?
Exactly, yeah.
You don't know how close to the edge you are, maybe. So I think having made mistakes is a huge asset, you know, and so absolutely I've made mistakes, and I've had failures. Well, it comes necessarily business failures, but you know, failures in terms of where things were structured, failures in terms of, you know, who I took on as investors or board members or things like that, etc. That, you know, you'd say, right, you won't make that mistake again, you know.
Yeah. No, as you say, it's such an asset to made the mistakes, bared the scars, and obviously then had the learnings off the back of them. Would you have a biggest inspiration, or has that changed over time? One person?
Biggest inspiration. I am inspired by people like Steve Jobs. Okay. And there's so much in that statement, but, you know, he really challenged the status quo. And, you know, not that it's concept have been crazy, but, you know, looking at something and saying, please tell me why I can't do it this way, you know, and the perseverance and everything that goes with that, you know. And I think, and maybe I mentioned Steve Jobs because of the fact that I've kind of touched that area a couple of times, you know, back in the days of DVD and again now with CleverCards, or, you know, so, you know, yeah, I think knowing what's possible, being very, very focused on that outcome, you know, ruthless in your execution towards that outcome, because lots of people have got ideas. Honestly, it's the easiest part. People, I meet some founders and they go, yeah, I can't really tell you everything now, and, you know, and look, you can write it. I could write it out for you. I could write it now, how to do what we've done. I could write it out for you, step by step. Go and do it.
It's the execution part.
Down to the execution. And that's the hard part. And to execute, you also need to learn. You know, I'm sure one of the top premiership managers in the UK could write out for you the tactics and say, there you go, stand in the pitch on your own. Well, you need another 10 people to come with you, and you better get the right players, and you better get the right dynamic between those players. And so it's, you know, it's all about execution.
Yeah, so many different things come into it. Would you say you have, well, I guess in terms of the most important risk you've taken and why?
The most important risk I've taken, how do I answer that question? The most important risk I've taken. I think it was a risk building the infrastructure, which was a long burn. Okay. And for CleverCards, I mean, okay. So building that infrastructure out, integrating with Mastercard, it was going to take a long time. Took 3 times longer than we thought. Okay. But when I look back now, by God, was that are we in a fortunate position? That's an important one. I mean, I could equally say been very focused on profitable unit economics from the get-go. While there was a lot of businesses out there, I said, look, let's just get the customers and worry about it later. I mean, that's just, I can't get myself around that. How can you go out and try and, you know, and in some cases done very successfully. I mean, you know, Facebook did it and WhatsApp and everything else, etc., and they monetize it later. But it's a level of risk is really the point, and you need to manage the risk with the timing around the investment horizon and the length of time that you've got funds for, etc. So you need to get that balance right. You know, if you're going off to build, you know, some brand new technology in a completely new space, with something that's going to take 10 years to come to market, well, you need capital to fund you to that part, you know. So that was probably, I'd say that was one of the risks.
Yeah, I think getting the foundations and infrastructure in place is obviously the reason why you're in the position where you are now, and why there's so much opportunity going into the future.
Yeah.
But look, it was great having you on the podcast. I think our listeners will obviously have a lot of takings from it. I think for any business out there thinking of CleverCards, as you say yourself, it's a no-brainer. So thanks for coming on and telling us a bit more about you and the company itself.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.